In 1965, 20 years after World War II concluded, Jewish scholar and literary critic George Steiner pondered a profound question. What does it mean to be a Holocaust survivor if you were never in the camps? This video delves into that inquiry through Steiner's autobiographical essay, A Kind of Survivor, exploring how the Holocaust impacted not only those who endured it, but also those who managed to escape, and even those born after the events. We investigate how the trauma of genocide has been passed down through generations, influencing identity, memory, and literature for Jewish thinkers and writers in the post-war era. You'll encounter figures like Helen Sixou and Daniel Mendelssohn, whose works blend classical scholarship with personal memory, representing a new kind of survivor, individuals shaped not by direct experience, but by the inherited scars of history. This narrative revolves around memory, loss, exile, and the pursuit of meaning amidst the aftermath of catastrophe. In A Kind of Survivor, a personal reflection written in 1965 for Commentary, a monthly publication on Jewish history, politics, and culture, Steiner recounts how, due to my father's foresight before the war, moving the family first from Vienna to Paris and then to the United States, I happened not to be there when the names were called out. I did not stand in the public square with the other children I grew up with, or see my parents vanish when the train doors were flung open. Yet in another sense, I am a survivor and not whole. Steiner articulates survivor's guilt, a feeling of personal grief, cultural loss, and geographical dislocation that drives the overarching theme of his writing, the black mystery of what happened in Europe, examining the reasons behind the Holocaust. Steiner's relationship with the Holocaust is complex. He avoided its worst horrors, so he doesn't share the exact experience of the children who stood in that public square that day. But he is, as the title of the piece indicates, a kind of survivor. He experiences what Adorno describes as the exile's mutilated sense of self. He is not whole. He expresses how the memory of the Holocaust haunts me and controls my habits of feeling, asserting that it is indivisible from my own identity. Like many survivors, Steiner carries the painful awareness of the horrors inflicted on Jews like him and the fortunate chances that kept him from those fates. In A Kind of Survivor, he observes that the traumatic echoes of the Holocaust impact not only those who witnessed it, but also seep into the next generation through their parents' fears, guilt, and ways of being. This, too, is a form of experiencing the Holocaust. At times, when I see my children in the room, or think I hear them breathing in the quiet of the house, I feel a wave of fear. I've placed an ancient burden on their shoulders, and they carry the weight of savagery behind them. To have been a European Jew in the early 20th century was to hand down a sentence to one's own children, forcing them into a reality nearly beyond comprehension. No matter how hard they try, they can't escape our shadow. Steiner reflects not only on how he indirectly experienced the Holocaust as a child, in ways he may still struggle to understand, but also on how that legacy has shaped his children. Being a Holocaust survivor becomes a shared experience across generations. For Steiner, the Holocaust imposes burdens even on those who weren't alive when it happened. They, too, are survivors, but in a different way than he is, and different from those who faced a direct encounter with the atrocities of the Third Reich. As a child whose family fled the Holocaust before the war, Steiner is a kind of survivor, yet his experience differs from that of Primo Levi or Elie Wiesel, who endured concentration camps, and also from other refugees like Hannah Arendt or Rachel Bespaloff, or even from other child refugees like Jeffrey Hartman. That momentous event, the Holocaust, impacted everyone in unique ways. Even children born after the war are survivors in their own right. Steiner, known for his aversion to theoretical exploration, did not delve deeply into this idea of intergenerational survivorhood. However, in the 1990s, the Romanian-born American Jewish scholar Marianne Hirsch, daughter of Holocaust survivors, cautiously introduced the idea of post-memory, defining it as being distinct from memory due to generational distance and from history because of a profound personal connection. Post-memory, as described by Hirsch, conveys a feeling she experienced, reflecting Steiner's concern for his children. It captures how the memories and traumas of her parents were transferred to her, as if they were her own. In her later work, she defines post-memory as a generation's way of transmitting experiences through various forms of communication. Family life, even in its tender moments, is deeply influenced by a collective imagination formed by public narratives and shared stories that affect how both individual and family memories are passed on. Mirroring Steiner's worries for his kids, Hirsch emphasizes the family aspect of post-memory. The quiet times in Steiner's home, where he can only hear his children breathing nearby, embody her idea of intimate moments. Steiner's children represent what Hirsch, inspired by Eva Hoffman, terms the post-generation. She explains that post-memory denotes how the generation after bears the personal and collective trauma of their predecessors. It involves a return of traumatic knowledge and experiences, stemming from the pain of recalling trauma, though it's separated by generations. Hirsch articulates the feelings that individuals like Steiner grasp intuitively. Children of those who faced collective trauma inherit a haunting and unfathomable past meant to be borne only by their parents. The creative expressions of second-generation individuals, through fiction, art, memoir, and testimony, aim to depict the lasting impacts of living near the suffering and emotional struggles of survivors of great historical trauma. The losses of family, home, and a sense of safety seep from one generation to the next. Hirsch identifies two types of post-memory. The first, familial, describes the direct identification between child and parent within the family, along with a broader recognition among contemporaries. The second type, termed affiliative post-memory, extends beyond the weakened family ties that arise from war and persecution. The contemporary and generational connections within the literal second generation, along with widely accessible structures of mediation, create a compelling environment for a larger community to engage in an organic web of transmission. For Hirsch, these two forms of post-memory signify different modes of passing down stories, yet post-war Jewish classicists find themselves intertwined in both. Hélène Cixous, born in 1937 in Oran, Algeria, to Jews forced to flee Germany and France, and Daniel Mendelssohn, born into a Jewish family in New York City in 1960, both suffered heavy losses during the Holocaust. The resulting silence around their deceased relatives and the narratives of those who survived profoundly shaped Cixous and Mendelssohn's identities. In Cixous's Holocaust memoir, Osnabrück Station to Jerusalem, she revisits Osnabrück, Germany, the city where her mother was born, 3 years after her mother's passing. There, she seeks information about her extended family lost in the Holocaust, aiming to better understand the city from the fragmented and fantastical tales told by her mother. Hoffman describes Osnabrück Station to Jerusalem as belonging to the category of second-generation return memoirs, highlighting journeys taken by descendants of Holocaust victims to places where their families lived before the tragedy. Similarly, Mendelssohn's memoir, The Lost, A Search for 6 of 6 Million, reflects a quest as he travels to the hometowns of ancestors who didn't escape to the United States before the war and perished in the Holocaust. Unlike Cixous, who was alive during that dark time, Mendelssohn embodies the third generation, marked by the realization that they not only missed the experience of the Holocaust, but will also be the last to personally know a Holocaust survivor. As representations of second and third generation responses to the Holocaust, the works of Cixous and Mendelssohn exemplified Jewish cultural production within the framework of familial post-memory of the Holocaust. What sets them apart is that both Mendelssohn and Cixous, as scholars immersed in classical philology and comparative literature, engaged deeply with the scholarly discussions of Greek antiquity, particularly Homer. They are aware of being part of a lineage shaped by Jewish scholars from wartime who have influenced their work. In 1997 interview with Mireille Calle-Gruber, Cixous expressed, "We are Western beings. All Western human beings have common ancestors, even if they don't know it. We descend from a blend of biblical characters and those from the Homeric tradition." This perspective allows Cixous to feel a connection to a cultural and academic heritage that includes figures like Auerbach, Adorno, and Bespaloff, who also recognize their roots in Homer and the Bible. Similarly, like Steiner, who explored the Iliad as a child with his father, or Vidal-Naquet, who delved into the epics with his tutor during the Nazi occupation of France, Sixa speaks of how she never separated the Bible from the myths and stories that have enveloped her since childhood. She recalls a tapestry of influences, including children's books and the Iliad and the Odyssey, along with tales from her Jewish grandmother, Omi, who upheld the Jewish tradition in their fatherless home. For Sixus, the Homeric epics in the Bible represent a shared cultural heritage, linking her to earlier European Jewish scholars. Mendelssohn shares a similarly profound connection to Jewish Homerists who wrote during and after the Holocaust. In his works An Odyssey, A Father, a Son, and an Epic, and Three Rings, A Tale of Exile, Narrative, and Fate, Mendelssohn discusses his mentors, Jenny Strauss-Clay and Froma Zeitlin. Clay's father, Paul Eliezer Krauss, a groundbreaking professor of Islam, like many Jewish academics, was forced out of Germany by the Nazis and tragically took his life in Cairo in 1944, leaving behind his infant daughter, Jenny. She was adopted and brought to the United States by her maternal uncle, the political scientist Leo Strauss, who was friends with Arendt, Walter Benjamin, and other German Jewish intellectuals who either fled or met untimely ends in Europe. Though primarily a political philosopher, Strauss, like many of his fellow German Jewish exiles, recognized the foundational role of Homer in European history. In a letter to his student, the future classics professor Seth Bernadette, Strauss expressed his belief that Homer initiated a continuous tradition that persisted until the late 18th century. For Strauss, Homer represents the beginning of it all, but he also notes a cultural fracture, placing it earlier than the war. When Clay became a professor of classics at the University of Virginia, she brought with her the tradition of Jewish wartime philology, which influenced her scholarship and her mentoring of Daniel Mendelssohn during his undergraduate years. Mendelssohn's other major mentor, Froma Zeitlin, was a Jewish classicist born in New York in 1933. Beyond her work on ancient drama, Zeitlin founded Princeton's Jewish Studies program and wrote about topics related to the Holocaust. She also supervised Mendelssohn's PhD in classics. Although neither Clay nor Zeitlin explicitly linked Homer to the Holocaust, Clay members the post-World War II generation, while Zeitlin, born before the war, has a more personal connection to post-memory due to her American upbringing. In an interview, Zeitlin shared that her decision to pursue Jewish studies was influenced by the haunting possibility of what her own life might have been during World War II. Her article, The Vicarious Witness, Belated Memory, and Authorial Presence in Recent Holocaust Literature, resonates with many themes explored by Auerbach in Odysseus' Scar. She notes that regardless of the forms Holocaust testimonies take, they all navigate a landscape of traumatized memory. This landscape is where we continue to document, remember, reimagine, and reenact various responses to the catastrophic events that challenged our established ways of thinking and the validity of aesthetic claims to adequately capture emotional depth. Here are the key issues surrounding mimesis, the literary technique focused on how to depict reality in literature, and Mimesis, the book that explores this representation in light of the Holocaust. Zeitlin acknowledges the intertwined nature of scholarly work on post-memory, expressing gratitude to Mendelssohn and referencing both Hirsch and Hartmann in his initial notes. To Mendelssohn, these connections feel almost familial. In An Odyssey, he recalls a comment from Clay made during her undergraduate years while she was studying the Odyssey with him. You can't write anything until you've read everything. For Mendelssohn, this statement revealed a certain intellectual inheritance, representing knowledge passed down through generations. He then weaves himself into Clay's academic and familial lineage, tracing the intellectual legacy back to Jenny's father, who also happened to be her teacher. This man, named Strauss, was a classics scholar and political thinker, shaped by Germany's renowned classical education. This lineage extends further back through Strauss's mentors to Friedrich August Wolff, the pioneer of classical philology. These mentor-student connections, particularly among Germans who hold a mix of emotional attachment and respect for academic authority, forge a historical network akin to the branches of a family tree, reflecting a lineage of learning and scholarship. In Mendelssohn's experience, it links Jenny to her father, his mentors, and ultimately to Wolff. Alongside his biological family, Mendelssohn elaborates on a second lineage of classical scholars, asserting that not all genealogies are rooted in genetics. His birth family is linked to those haunted by the Holocaust, while his scholarly heritage connects to those who initially explored the essence and aesthetics of trauma. Thus, Mendelssohn's relationship with Homer is intertwined with the Holocaust, just as his examination of the Holocaust is inextricably linked to Homer. For Hirsch, affiliative post-memory includes three key criteria that the Homeric epics satisfy. First, these epics were widely accessible as physical texts for reading and study. Additionally, Jewish writings about Homer during the war showcase their adaptability as frameworks for understanding different kinds of wartime suffering. Lastly, these epics are undeniably captivating. Post-war Jewish classicists recognize themselves as part of a tradition deeply rooted in wartime literature on Homer. Consequently, the quests of Sixus and Mendelssohn for their familial histories intertwine with Homer. Mendelssohn's An Odyssey, A Father, a Son, and an Epic, processes his father's death and his own childhood memories through his experience teaching a course on the Odyssey at Bard College, as well as a cruise retracing the Odyssey that he took with his father in the Eastern Mediterranean. Similarly, Sixus's Mother Homer is Dead blends her recollections of her and her mother's past with the immediacy of her mother's prolonged illness and passing, all viewed through the lens of the Homeric epics. Through this connection, both authors weave together their parents' deaths, a traumatic memory that resonates with the haunting legacy of the Holocaust, with the Homeric narratives. In doing so, they inherit a scholarly tradition of Jewish wartime writing about Homer that links the epics to themes of suffering, grief, and loss. Their academic identities are also tied to the lineage of Jewish scholars who shifted the focus of Homeric studies to these themes during and right after the war. Indeed, An Odyssey illustrates this legacy beautifully. Early in the book, Mendelssohn offers a close reading of the opening lines of the Odyssey alongside reflections on his and his family's past. His analysis of the lines that translate as "who wandered widely" includes insights into the etymology of Odysseus's name, explaining the word Odine. This is the root of Odysseus' name and of his poem's name too. The hero of this vast epic of voyaging, journeying, and travel is literally the man of pain. He is the one who travels. He is the one who suffers. In her book Root Prints, Hélène Cixous, the feminist philosopher, dramatist, and self-proclaimed Juif femme, expresses her affinity for scars, referring to them as stories. For her, like for Auerbach, a scar represents more than just a physical mark. It embodies a narrative standpoint. Cixous, much like Hartmann, is driven by the memory of scars. She sees writing as inseparable from suffering and believes that woundedness, decay, and death fuel her creative energy. In fact, she dedicated an entire book, Stigmata, Escaping Texts, to exploring the essence of woundedness and the act of writing through scars. In the foreword to Stigmata, her close friend Jacques Derrida, a fellow Francophone Algerian Jewish scholar, describes it as a blessing of the blesser, a significant poetic examination of the scar that underpins literary creation and writing in general. Derrida points out that Stigmata overflows our language, the French language, in every way, doing so in a rare and entirely new manner. This novel approach centers on wounds. To discuss the wound, all wounds, what some might term traumatisms, to refer to the scar generally, at the very foundation of Hélène Cixous' writing and her primal scenes, it transcends and sacrifices the French language without truly losing it. This perspective in Derrida's foreword implies that Cixous is infusing Auerbach's idea of mimesis into the French context. She sacrifices the French language, reminiscent of Odysseus' scar, yet manages to do so without sacrificing it, akin to Abraham's choice not to sacrifice Isaac. Similar to Auerbach, Derrida identifies Cixous' writing origin as stemming from a scar, an idea that emerged from Jewish interpretations of Homer during the Holocaust. Cixous further discusses this in her introduction, noting that the texts compiled in this volume bear the imprint of wounds. They arise from blows, representing a transformation of spilled blood, whether real or metaphorical, as a hemorrhage of the soul. Moreover, Cixous emphasizes that writing and woundedness are tightly intertwined with traumatic memory. The scarred figures she portrays in Stigmata, she asserts, carry the burden of keeping horror alive, the horror we may not wish to live in the present, yet we strive to preserve its haunting gift, its testimony, and its transformation. Wounds serve as the foundation of storytelling, memory, and the preservation of our origin tales, even when those narratives face erasure or forgetfulness. For Sixus, these memory wounds are deeply tied to her experiences as a young Jewish girl during the war. She recounts in Stigmata that her first significant mark occurred at just 3 years old in a garden scene from her childhood in Oran, Algeria, back in 1940. Sixus, eager to join a garden meant for military officers and their children, her father being part of the resistance, finds herself blocked by other kids. To gain entry, she offers them stamps as a kind of trade. "My house is overflowing with stamps. Don't we have a vast family scattered across the world thanks to Hitler? Those who perished in Germany send letters from all corners of the globe. I've got all kinds of stamps." Yet one child doesn't buy her story. From above, a 6-year-old girl shouts, "Liar!" That word strikes me like a blow, leaving a mark. I hesitate. "Liar!" the voice taunts. "You have no stamps. All Jews lie." Suddenly, the ground vanishes beneath me, and I clutch the swing's cord, overwhelmed by all these foreign words. Jew? Liar? Indeed, Sixus's first wound, her initial scar linked to wartime antisemitism, reflected an identity crisis that shaped her writing. Everything is glaringly clear. If I present stamps to get my visa, I degrade myself and my people. I secure a dreadful permit. If I fail to present stamps, I prove the stereotype that all Jews lie, discrediting myself and my community. In the essay that wraps up Stigmata, Sixus contemplates the uncertainty and fragility of her national identity as a child. I grew to think that I might have been born in one of the many countries where my maternal family landed after being scattered by the Nazi devastation. The initial stigma that fueled her subsequent writing is deeply tied to her sense of not belonging. Sixus expresses this feeling, saying she feels connected to neither France, Germany, nor Algeria. In many ways, like Steiner, she represents a type of survivor. Circumstances spared her from the concentration camps, yet she carries the lasting scars from the experiences of anti-Semitism, exile, and memory. 58 years later, the emotional toll of being labeled a liar due to her Jewish identity, coupled with growing up in a family fractured by exile, loss, and diaspora, continues to shape her reality. As she matured, Sixus emerged as a leading figure in French academia in the post-war era. Her literary contributions span a wide range of genres including plays, essays, traditional scholarly works, fiction, and memoir. Within her body of work, the classical legacy plays a significant, though often overlooked, role. This can be seen in her plays like The Name of Oedipus and her writings such as the Book of Promethea and the section Sorties from the Newly Born Woman, where she likens herself to Achilles. Perhaps most renowned is her piece The Laugh of the Medusa, where she pioneered deconstructive literary analysis and introduced the concept of écriture féminine, an approach to writing that emphasizes the embodied experiences of women. Throughout her career as a scholar and writer, Sixus maintained a close bond with her mother, Eve, who was born in Osnabrück, Germany in 1910. For Sixus, the distinctions between the past and the present, myth and reality, as well as scholarship and memoir, have always been fluid. This fusion is vividly presented in Mother Homer is Dead, which chronicles the final year of her mother's life, intertwining the narratives of the Iliad and the Odyssey. In this work, Sixus encapsulates the key themes of Jewish literature regarding Homer during wartime. The focus on wounds and illness as lasting scars that narrate traumatic pasts and the prominence of suffering and grief within the Homeric tales. In the section The Anger of the Scamander, referencing the river that nearly drowns in the corpses of Trojans slain by Achilles, Sixus shares that in February 2013, she began revisiting the Iliad, seeking to connect with Ajax, the warrior who loses his great honor one fateful evening. Ajax serves as a poignant symbol for her mother, who too will meet her end on a night much like that. Sixus's Ajax does more than just succumb. He loses his immense glory. Her version of the Iliad is steeped in sorrow. She reflects, "The Iliad was waiting for me, with its horrific pleasures. Everyone is fated to die. Everyone anticipates their end. One cannot truly live without facing death. To escape dying, one must suspend life beneath their own tent." For Sixus, like Bespaloff, the central theme of the Iliad is death and the conclusion of what Bespaloff called the fleeting joys of life. As her mother nears death, the Iliad and its exploration of mortality captivate her. I can't stop reading the Iliad. It's the same tale, chant after chant. They fight, they kill, they perish, they are destined to die. They step forward, share their names and lineages, the admirable figures they once were. They destroy each other in song, and I wish that this song would last forever, with the blood and the sustenance of bodies, the wrath of the Scamander, overwhelmed by all the corpses. I feel it deeply. What is this story of overdying, this suffering with an ending we know yet an unpredictable duration? Engaging with the Iliad brings Sixus into her own reality. It is a narrative about death and memory. With each character's demise, they share their names and genealogies, connecting themselves to a narratable past at the moment of their passing. In this interpretation, Sixus pondering death resembles the Scamander, suffocating on the aftermath of Achilles' killing spree. Just like the river, her language begins to flow, weaving into a sprawling, free-flowing sentence, as the rules of grammar and syntax dissolve into a stream of consciousness. Unlike the Iliad, which Auerbach noted is never lacking logical and grammatical ties, Sixus, echoing Livy, stylistically embodies the disintegration of those connections as her anger escalates. I feel it personally. This contemplation of death in the Iliad swiftly shifts to her mother. My mother has been ready for the final act since the year 2000, all wrapped in bandages for a year now. Everyone knows who is going to triumph and who will falter. For Sixu, reflecting on the Iliad prompts thoughts on modern suffering. She evokes images reminiscent of nearby shades, embodying figures like Maman and Mandela, representing both the dead and the living. She contemplates her mother's passing through a Homeric lens, likening it to the hero Ajax in the Iliad and as a shade in the Odyssey. However, these interpretations are far removed from pre-war ideals of heroism, instead focusing on the wartime and post-war perspectives of pain, suffering, and mortality. Indeed, Mother Homer is Dead becomes an odyssey in itself, chronicling her mother's death. The narrative opens with The Very Long Journey, detailing Ave's gradual decline. This journey is recognized as lengthy and uncertain. Its conclusion is inevitable, yet it remains unclear how long it will truly take. Unlike a triumphant return, this odyssey leads to an inevitable descent into the underworld. Sixus describes the process of caring for her mother as they navigate through each new obstacle, drawing parallels to Odysseus's adventures, but with Ave's struggles reflecting the experience of aging rather than heroism. Sixu illustrates the delicate care needed in moving her mother, depicting the pain incurred to prevent even greater suffering, like the threat of bed sores. For Sixus, the ordinary job of caring for her mother's incontinence takes on a monumental significance, akin to Odysseus's most renowned feat. She describes the bedsore as the Cyclops' eye, a deep purplish void that warns of impending doom. This sense of looming danger arrives swiftly. Sixus later expresses a yearning to embrace her mother as she did in childhood, but she feels an insurmountable barrier, similar to the unreachable shade of Anticlea, Ulysses' mother. Her mother's hurt body transforms into a narrative echoing the Odyssey, where the encounter with the spectral mother becomes a model for Sixus' bond with her own mother. Fiona Cox points out that Sixus's quest to reconnect with her parents aligns her with a lineage of figures who traverse ancient epic narratives for the same purpose. She follows in the footsteps of Odysseus searching for Anticlea, Telemachus looking for Odysseus, and Aeneas searching for Anchises. Cox suggests that through Mother Homer is Dead, Sixus forges a new path in classical reception by blending the invocation of classic works with the expression of women's intimate sorrows and experiences. This observation holds, yet it only captures part of Sixus's layered interaction with the Iliad and the Odyssey. Notably, Cox overlooks Sixus's Jewish identity and her mother's displacement from Osnabrück by the Nazis, not to mention the resurgence of anti-Semitism that compelled Hélène and Ève back to France after the Algerian War. Sixus recalls how her mother swiftly fled Germany at Hitler's early speeches and took the first flight to France from Algiers in 1972 when prompted by police. Mother Homer is Dead represents a form of écriture féminine, encapsulating the experiences of women, particularly her mother's decline. Additionally, it serves as a testament of Jewish post-memory. The deteriorating body holds the last vestiges of a world before the Holocaust, and Helene fears that her mother's physical loss means losing her memories as well. The title itself plays on the intertwining of the distant epic past and the recent past of her mother's final year. Homer encompasses the name of the ancient poet, the French word for mother, and also refers to Sixou's maternal grandmother and aunt. The C, represented by the word mère, sounds like Homer, or man-mother, connecting to the central themes of both the Odyssey and Eve's descent, home. By feminizing Homer, Sixou embraces the ancient poet as a symbol of feminine writing, positioning this epic poet as her mother. This idea comes across powerfully in the opening line of the book. "This book has already been written by my mother," and later she states, "This is not the book I wanted to write. I do not write it. It is my mother who dictated it this last year, without wishing to, without her wanting to, without my wanting to." Throughout the work, Sixous emphasizes her mother as both the author of Mother Homer is Dead and the Homeric epics. She refers to the notebooks where she chronicled her mother's last year as like subchapters in the Odyssey. Thus, her mother's passing marks not just the loss of her physical presence, but also the loss of memories, leading to the fading of Helene's post-memory. Her maternal grandmother's death had created a similar void. Just as Omi is nothing anymore, all that remains is one elegant image containing the rich volumes of a life, with its dramas, its journeys, its Europes, and its Africas. In the force of that gaze, there lies a monumental warning of an omissi, a clever nod to the epic's title and her grandmother's name, as well as a reflection on what an epic of absent narratives might look like. A poet would suffice to give text to this fragment. The unspoken cause of this journeying was the rise of the Nazis, leading to the scattering of her family across the globe, the original memory scar she identified in Stigmata. The loss of her grandmother is intimately linked to the memory of the Holocaust, as is the recollection of her mother's life. She reflects on her time in Osnabrück, where her mother's warm stories provided a refuge from the passage of time. Gradually, the city became a borrowed reality shaped by her mother's tales, bustling with life, whether at Omi's house or among her friends, driven by a curiosity about the many characters akin to those in the Iliad. Sixous captures the essence of post-memory, referring to a borrowed reality of experiences that aren't entirely hers, drawing a parallel to the Iliad. The cherished memories of her mother's early years, once vibrant and hopeful, soon take a dark turn as the Holocaust looms. Then cruelly removed from Osnabrück, systematically displaced, terrified, and slaughtered, forgotten and marginalized individuals, stripped of their identities, reduced to figures from tragic narratives, the forsaken who no longer remember Osnabrück. The memories of her mother's life before the war will fade with her. The city of Osnabrück will lose its light. Gradually, I won't find joy in returning there, as Mother Homer has passed away. If the narrative embodies her mother, Homer, its themes resonate with a modern Homeric narrative. Indeed, this Homer is a survivor of the Holocaust. The text draws a parallel between the slow fading of Sixous' mother and the epic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey, not capturing the pre-war triumph, but instead revealing the complexities of wartime and post-war Jewish interpretation. In the final sections, Sixous expresses, "I return to writing, to the notebook dated Sunday, 30th of June, at 6 in the morning, driven by an overwhelming weight of suffering that compels my entire being to seek relief. Until that date, this notebook was merely a tissue for my tears. I was absorbing the blood." Sixous' writing embodies a feminine style, deeply intertwined with physicality, the essence of tears and blood. This visceral approach incites a profound response, mirroring the suffering that figures such as Bespaloff recognized as central to the Homeric epics. In exploring post-memory, this pain is deeply tied to how Holocaust memories are passed down through generations. Forces and mysteries of the White Notebook. It stands as a reservoir of memory, separate from me, while I am overwhelmed by forgetfulness. I have forgotten everything. Already I am reconstructing versions that I accept as memories, and I am starting to bear false witness. Sixous speaks of her epic as the collection of wounds, where each wound carries a memory, and every bandage represents an effort to remember amidst forgetfulness. In the opening of Three Rings, A Tale of Exile, Narrative and Fate, Daniel Mendelssohn reflects on the personal impact, psychological, emotional, and physical, of his earlier book, The Lost: The Search for Six of the 6 Million, which embodies a third-generation perspective on Holocaust post-memory. In this work, he journeys to Bolekiv, Ukraine, where much of his family lived and perished during the Holocaust, and he travels worldwide to find survivors who were scattered by this tragedy. The emotional burden of this journey was intense, leaving him feeling incapacitated. When I finished writing the story, he notes, I found myself unable to move. I initially thought I was just tired. However, now looking back a decade and a half later, I realize I went through a crisis of sorts, almost a breakdown. For several months, I struggled to leave my apartment, much less travel. His quest to trace the paths of his ancestors who perished and to uncover the narratives of the descendants of those who survived placed him in this strange state that lasted for quite some time after I returned from my last research trip, particularly after visiting the Belzec death camp, where some of his ancestors had met their end. 3 years later, with guidance from Froma Zeitlin, Mendelssohn began to consider writing about the Greek classics as a means of sidestepping the challenging subject of the Holocaust and its legacy, which had occupied his thoughts during and after the creation of The Lost. He believed that this literary topic could help him escape the painful stories that had haunted him for so long, encompassing themes of political breakdown, religious intolerance, and the haunting narratives of both successful and failed escapes, displacement, and the experiences of Germans and Jews. After finishing the manuscript for what would become an Odyssey, Mendelssohn realized something about his state of mind following The Lost. He was grappling with what the Greeks termed aporia, a state of paralyzing confusion and an inability to navigate out of his predicament. This aporia stemmed from a creative and spiritual crisis he faced after completing his earlier work. However, Mendelssohn made a clear distinction between the crisis he encountered while writing The Lost and the challenges with the Greek book. The anguish that defined his relationship with the Holocaust narrative had transformed into what he described as narrative despair in this new project. In a moment of insight, Mendelssohn explored the roots of the word aporia, which signifies a lack of path or no way. From a narrative standpoint, he understood that an Odyssey could not be structured linearly, but needed to employ ring composition, a technique used by Homer where one story is embedded within another. Mendelssohn remembered first learning about this technique from his mentor, classics professor Jenny Strauss Clay at the University of Virginia, whose parents both perished during World War II. He noted that his awareness of ring composition dates back to at least his junior year in college, when he participated in a seminar focused on the Odyssey, where this method is famously utilized. This reflection on ring composition leads Mendelssohn to Erich Auerbach, a notable Holocaust refugee scholar. Mendelssohn observes that one of the finest examples of ring composition in Western literature is a poignant part from Book 19 of the Odyssey, where the hero is recognized by his elderly nurse, Euryclea. He cites the opening line of Auerbach's Mimesis, identifying himself among the readers of the Odyssey who will recall that recognition moment. Auerbach and Mimesis take on key roles in Three Rings, as Mendelssohn realizes that the Homeric tactic used to depict Odysseus's childhood scar, revealing his identity in the present, mirrors the interviews he conducts with Holocaust survivors in The Lost. These survivors also share their scars from the past, which have shaped their identities. In these conversations, Mendelssohn notes the challenges survivors faced in finding the right way to tell their stories. He recognizes that he experienced a similar narrative struggle while trying to weave together the account of his father's final year and death in an Odyssey. He reflects that ring composition has been an unavoidable consideration for him since his research on the Holocaust about 15 years ago. He recalls a survivor who expressed frustration over his inability to convey the feeling of being targeted by German persecution. Auerbach's concept of ring composition, along with his comparison of Homeric and biblical styles in Odysseus' Scar, becomes a framework for addressing the traumas of the Holocaust and later, the impact of his father's death in the modern era. In both instances, Auerbach's analysis of the Odyssey in Odysseus's Scar serves as a guiding model, aligning with Auerbach's intentions. In contrast, Sixus finds the Homeric style insufficient for narrating her own post-memory scars. As the daughter of a survivor and a survivor in her own right, she, as an intellectual in deconstruction and psychoanalytic literature, leans towards a style that Auerbach associates with the Bible: complex, rich with depth, and filled with layers of ungraspable interiority. Mendelssohn points out what he refers to as Auerbach's skepticism towards the Greek technique, linking, like Auerbach, the challenge of realistic portrayal to the Holocaust. He argues that ring composition brings forth broader questions regarding the issues of representation in literature and the ways writers make their subjects appear realistic. This dilemma has troubled many artists as they examine complex themes, one of the most significant being the horrifying event that brought Auerbach to Istanbul: the German plan to annihilate Europe's Jews during World War II. However, Mendelssohn doesn't dismiss the Homeric style of storytelling. He expresses, "It's hard for me to abandon my faith in the Greek approach, in the perhaps superstitious belief that beneath the seeming disarray and chaos of the world, what better example could there be than the history of classical scholarship? There's a discernible shape, perhaps even a design." Mendelssohn's conflict between fragmentation and coherence, chaos and design, places him squarely in the crisis of enlightenment and rational critique that defined the wartime and post-war era, a dilemma central to Jewish interpretations of both Homer and the Holocaust. This tension is evident in an Odyssey between Mendelssohn and his father, J. J, trained in mathematics, embodies a rational perspective that contrasts with his son's, creating an Oedipal dynamic between them. Daniel, drawn to the Dionysian, shares, "I've always been anxious about arithmetic, geometry, and quadratics, rigid systems that allow no nuance, embellishments, evasions, or lies. I've never liked math." Unlike his father, who is a mathematician and engineer, Daniel remains skeptical of such assertions. The debate on knowledge persists. After Daniel struggled with calculus, his father would often say it was unfortunate since you can't see the world clearly without calculus. Daniel would respond that understanding the world requires having read the Aeneid in Latin. This theme is illustrated by an anecdote from their visit to the University of Virginia. His father attempts to persuade him to enroll by exclaiming, "Look at the architecture. Everything you love, classical, Tuscan, Doric, that's what it should be about. The age of reason." Daniel's father clings to an Enlightenment perspective, where reason stands as the hallmark of humanity and the clearest method for grasping the world around us. In contrast, Daniel, part of the post-war generation, questions these beliefs. But the truth was that the ornate neoclassical buildings clustered around a central structure reminiscent of the Pantheon in Rome left me feeling indifferent. This tension between unity and fragmentation, between reason and emotion that drove Dali's critique of Ingres or Broch's view on Mycenaean art, is echoed in the contrasting views of father and son, one shaped by experiences before the war, the other emerging in its aftermath. This generational gap is evident in the classroom as well. When the topic shifts to how often Odysseus cries, Jay interjects, saying, "Well, I was in the army, and I knew some real heroes. And I can assure you, nobody cried." Mendelssohn seizes the moment to differentiate between the Iliad and the Odyssey. He explains to his students that one of the Odyssey's purposes is to reshape the concept of heroism. While heroes of the Iliad may withhold their tears, the Odyssey portrays a narrative filled with suffering and sorrow, which allows for grief to be expressed. Mendelssohn adds, "The Odyssey," I continued, "is a poem about a post-war existence. It unfolds in the wake of conflict, exploring what a hero looks like when there are no battles left to wage. Achilles is celebrated for his physical might, his speed, and strength. Odysseus, though an esteemed warrior, is best known for his cleverness and resourcefulness. Achilles meets his end, but Odysseus endures." One of the questions raised by the Odyssey is, what does survival heroism look like? Without explicitly stating it, Mendelssohn connects the Odyssey with the crucial themes explored by wartime scholars who influence him, representing a post-Enlightenment, post-war generation for whom the Odyssey symbolizes mourning and the quest for meaning in a world reshaped by devastating war. Mendelssohn, much like Sixtus, links the epic events to his parents' generation. Both Sixtus and Mendelssohn reflect the legacy of the generational shift in Jewish interpretations of Homer that took place during the war, a shift rooted in themes of injury, loss, sorrow, and mortality. Mendelssohn and Sixtus both craft deeply personal journeys that draw from the Jewish tradition of wartime and post-war narratives surrounding Homer, linking the epic tales to the Holocaust while also envisioning a future Jewish philology that carries forward these themes. Rather than operating on the grand scale of Homer, they focus on the more intimate dynamics of parent-child relationships. Yet through their examination of the wounded, decaying, and dying figures of their parents, they evoke the profound scar of modern Jewish history, a wound from which stories continue to arise, yet risks being silenced with each new generation. This anxiety about the quieting of suffering, of not discussing the Holocaust as a precursor to forgetting, has been a central concern within global Jewish life since World War II. Survivors like Primo Levi feared that their lived experiences, articulated from their wounds, would go unrecognized, while writers like Erich Auerbach aimed to create a poetics of woundedness to represent Holocaust experiences in a realistic and credible manner. During their lifetimes, they achieved this. Few in the mainstream doubt the truth of Levi's "If This Is a Man," or the broader reality of the Holocaust. Still, history and memory are fleeting, and while the goal of the Holocaust generation was to be believed, the task facing post-war Jewish writers is to ensure that the memory of the Holocaust persists over time, generations, and the tides of cultural amnesia. As memoirists from a subsequent generation, Sixtus and Mendelssohn actively engage in their family histories to unearth and safeguard elements of their personal and communal pasts that have remained hidden or forgotten. In this light, their work stands as a natural continuation of the wartime writers like Bespaloff, Adorno, Arendt, and others discussed in this book. Jewish writers during World War II transformed Enlightenment humanist perspectives that celebrated the glory of war and colonial triumphalism. Instead, they highlighted characters whose experiences in the Homeric epics resonated with their own wartime realities: slaves, refugees, exiles, widows, orphans, and others facing new forms of precarity. By the unique ways Mendelssohn, Sixtus, and other post-war Jewish writers carry on this tradition, they maintain a method of interpreting Homer that challenges the temporary praises of war and focuses on its lasting sorrows. In this manner, Homer, recognized as the author of the first narrative about a Holocaust, can serve as a means to prevent future atrocities.